Hello, and welcome to the course. I'm Stephen, your host for today, and I'm speaking with Professor Ariel Kalil of the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy. Professor Kalil is the Daniel Levin Professor at the Harris School, as well as the Director of the Center for Human Potential and Public Policy and co-director of the Behavioral Insights and Parenting Lab. She also holds an appointment as an adjunct professor at the Norwegian School of Economics. Professor Kalil has been the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including the William T. Grant Foundation Faculty Scholars Award and the Changing Faces of America's Children Young Scholars Award from the Foundation for Child Development. She's here today to talk to us about her career path and how she became a University of Chicago professor. Professor Kalil, welcome to the course. How are you today?
Thanks so much. I'm really delighted to be here.
So first things first, could you just give us a overview in sort of lay people terms of what it is that you research and what your position is at UChicago?
So I am the Daniel Levin Professor of Public Policy at the Harris School of Public Policy Studies at Chicago. I do research and I teach and I do all the regular things that professors do. I also direct the Center for Human Potential and Public Policy, and I co-direct the Behavioral Insights and Parenting Lab at the Harris School. Very broadly, my work is focused on inequality and child development. And I'm especially interested in how public policy can support low-income families and support low-income children to achieve their full potential. And I'm even more especially interested in the role of parents and in trying to understand how parents parent their children and how public policy can help support parents to do the things they want to do for their children and to understand the barriers and the bottlenecks that get in the way of parents being able to do what they want to help support their kids' skill development, especially in low income communities.
I want to go back into your personal history a little bit, but can you quickly take us through your routes, starting with college and up till now? What institutions have you attended? What posts have you held from college up until the present? Can you just take us through that?
Well, I went to undergraduate school at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where I double majored first in French language and literature and second in psychology. Then I did my PhD, my graduate work at the University of Michigan in developmental psychology. From there, I did a postdoc also at Michigan in an interdisciplinary research group at what was then the Institute for Public Policy Studies, what is now the Ford School of Public Policy, where I worked with economists and political scientists and a much broader array of people working on child development and public policy. And then I got my first academic job at the Harris School in 1999, and I have been there ever since.
One question that we've been asking everyone is take us back to when you were a kid, maybe like middle or high school age. What did you want to do? And were there any signs back then that you were going to end up in this field?
Yeah, that's a fun question. In fact, no, there were no signs at that time that that pointed to my doing what I do now. As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to do something quite different. As I mentioned in college, I was a French language and literature major, and throughout high school, I had been a big francophile and I loved language, and I was just certain that I wanted to join the Foreign Service. I imagined I would be a diplomat or something like that. And really what I focused on at the beginning of my undergraduate career. And in fact, I spent my junior year of college studying in France. I was at the French University taking courses in French with French students, and I was in heaven. I just thought, this is it. I can't imagine wanting to be anywhere else but here. I loved having a global perspective. I loved being out in the world. I loved to try to understand how people in different places live their lives and how different societies operate and so forth. And I came back to finish my senior year in college. And as I said, I had a double major in psychology, and I had to do a lot of work to finish that up in the last year, including doing a senior research thesis, which I had a wonderful mentor, Carol Riff at UW-Madison, who invited me into her research lab to do a thesis with her and sit in on her graduate course. And I was doing research. I was actually calling parents, as it turns out. The project was what makes parents at midlife happy. It turns out parents are happy when their kids are doing well and when their kids are happy. But this was Carol Riff was a gerontologist, and I was calling people to do interviews and ask them a set of questions and then code up their answers and look for patterns and correlations across their answers. And I just was fascinated with this. And I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. I love the research process. I love collecting data. I love analyzing data. I love writing research papers. And somehow the foreign service just drifted away. I was so captivated by the possibility that I could spend my life doing this and just thinking of interesting questions to ask, to ask of data. And she really encouraged me to go to graduate school, not surprisingly. And I did. And that was, I ended up at Michigan, which the University of Michigan is sort of the greatest place to be as a social scientist. It's just a ground zero for survey data research and interdisciplinary work. And I really felt that I had started off on the right path. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I didn't really know what it meant to be in the foreign service. I didn't know anybody who had done that. I think it was a maybe a sort of fantastical, kind of dream about this would be some kind of glamorous French-speaking international life that I had. But of course, it's a lot of hard work and very difficult to make it in the foreign service, and I didn't have any clue about that. So it wasn't, so devastating to leave those ideas behind. And then I had another super important turning point when I was at Michigan. As I said, I was studying developmental psychology with just a wonderful group of people. But I thought, I want to ask and answer research questions that are really relevant in the world. I want to say, well, this is a super important social problem that's happening in the US or somewhere else right now. What can I do to bring my scientific interest in child development and in family behavior to a question that is really relevant for social policy or what we're going to do to help families who need support. And as I said, Michigan was just exactly the right place to be to have those interests. And at that time, I mean, this is now some time ago, the whole, I would say, subfield of child development and public policy was just getting started. And I was really fortunate to be in on that and to know some people who were encouraging that line of work because to that point it hadn't been really customary for developmental psychologists to work on very applied problems, policy relevant problems. And I met a fantastic economist, Sheldon Danziger, who was very influential in public policy and poverty scholarship, who really took me under his wing, served on my dissertation committee, and was really the first person who understood this kind of interdisciplinary vision that I had for my future. I really didn't know what it exactly was going to look like or how exactly I was going to do it, but it was going to be some blend of developmental psychology and economics and public policy. And he just helped me lay down that path and really supported my starting it, which was quite unusual. And as I said, I did a postdoc at Michigan and it was under his direction. So 3 additional years of training with him and other scholars really helps me understand like there's a path here for me to ask the kind of questions that I'm really interested in. And I can do work that is both scientifically rigorous and important and also policy relevant. And in that way, I can hopefully make the world a better place.
How did your interests and the questions that you're talking about coalesce around the topic of parenting? Like, what do you think accounts for that focus?
Yeah, honestly, as I mentioned, it was the topic of my senior research thesis in college. And that was really just sort of serendipitous that I didn't choose that for any particular reason other than that's what my advisor was working on. But then when I got to graduate school in developmental psychology, it became abundantly clear that parents play a really important role in children's skill development. So it was not hard to imagine, focusing on what parents do and why they do it would be a good space to be working in. Then, as it turns out, I mean, developmental psychology is obviously interested in the role of parents, but so too are sociologists and economists. One of the things I think that has always defined my research career is my interest in interdisciplinary research and in just seeing that was from the first days of graduate school and for sure during my postdoc. I love nothing more than to be in a room full of people who aren't like me in terms of their discipline and just learn from them and see how we can fit a bunch of puzzle pieces together from our different ways of thinking and make something even greater. And when I learned that people in other fields were also working on questions of parenting and the home environment and parent decision making, and again, things that impede parents' ability to do what they want to do, whether that's money or time or a whole set of factors. It just became self sustaining because, really, as it turns out, there's still many more questions than answers. And I think I just kind of lucked out in finding a question that has sustained me now for almost 25 years, and in finding that there are really smart and interesting people, not only in my own discipline, but in other ones with whom I can work and collaborate and talk to. So I mean, it's a sort of a funny coincidence that I started out my very first research project on the question of parents and parent-child relationships, but it's pretty clear how I got from my graduate school days to this point, still working on a similar type of question.
And so, yeah, I mean, one thing that we ask a lot is, what is exciting to you about your current research or about what's going on in your field right now? I guess, given the interdisciplinary nature of your work, I'll expand that to, your field or adjacent fields. But what
Yeah.
is exciting right now?
Well, what's exciting right now, I would say, is that there's been some interesting recent developments in how people think about the role of parents, what parents do and why they do it. And I'll say just a couple different things from which I draw inspiration. One is that researchers, especially in economics, not surprisingly, have recently documented how macroeconomic conditions shape what parents do. So, what is the role of opportunity in education or in the labor market at the macro level? And how does that filter down to the individual choices that parents make in the private sphere of their home? I just find that super interesting to imagine that you can link something at the highest level in how the world works to really micro decisions that parents make about how they're going to spend their time or the kinds of discipline that they're going to impose on their children or the things that they aspire. I mean, this is not a new idea conceptually, and lots of fields have understood how culture and the environment shapes what people believe and what they do. But in recent years, there's just been some real innovations in the empirical work that's demonstrating exactly what those linkages look like to the kinds of things I'm interested in. So that's one area that's new and I find very exciting. Another area, which is and I don't particularly work in that area, I just draw intellectual inspiration from it. The other area that I do work in and is the focus of the work I do in my lab is in the world of, we can say, interventions, which are programs that one might offer to families to help them do something differently. So an intervention might aim to shift behavior in one direction or another for families who want to shift their behavior but need some support in doing so. The idea that we would have interventions for parents is very long-standing. We have lots of programs that we might offer to families in the service of helping parents do something that they might not have known to do, or that they might have known to do but have trouble doing for whatever reason. And, an intervention can be teaching people to do something different. It can be giving them the resources they need to do what they want to do. There's a whole variety of forms an intervention can take. But there has been an interest, I would say, in the past 10 years, 5 to 10 years, in reimagining what the form of those interventions, and whether we can design interventions that, I'm just going to say, are lighter touch and lower cost, and therefore more scalable. And what I mean by that is, often historically, the kinds of programs that we would design, by we, I mean academic scholars, medical practitioners, educators, and so forth. These programs would be very complex. So be very time consuming. If you were going to enroll in a program, you sort of have to promise you're going to stay in it for maybe 2 years, or come to lots of meetings, invite someone to your house. And so it's just
Going to
very,
be a whole thing.
very intense. It's going to be like a whole thing. and, and you as a parent might say, maybe I'll sign up for this because it sounds like a good idea. And then when you realize what you've signed up for, maybe it's not so appealing anymore. Along with my research partners, we just saw this as a really interesting puzzle to try to solve. Like, can we break out of this mold? Can we design something different? And I have been inspired by the behavioral economists and the behavioral scientists at the Booth School at the University of Chicago to try to strip down decision making into its simplest components, and to try to think about behavior change in a much simpler and lighter touch way that doesn't involve asking a parent to sign up for 2 years of parenting classes, but rather does something much simpler, like reframe messages, or send reminders to do a very specific thing, and reduce frictions to following through on goals, for example. All of this can be done in a much simpler way than has historically been done. And the thing that I got very excited about in the recent work that I've been doing is that these principles and these approaches had been applied to behaviors that people in the world are engaged in, like exercise, or saving for retirement, or adhering every day to the regimen of medicine that your doctor prescribed to you, and had not been applied in the realm of things that parents do. So we just said, there's a set of principles and approaches that seem to be working really well to understand how people think about big decisions in other arenas of their life. Should I exercise? Should I take this super important pill every single day that's going to prevent some future health catastrophe? Should I save for retirement? These are big ticket questions, and researchers had figured out how to move people's behavior so it was more in line with their stated goals and aspirations. And we said, well, we think parenting and the decisions parents make are also important and belong on that list of big ticket things that matter in life. And, could we apply the same approaches to, as I said, shifting parent behavior that had been applied in how do we get people to increase how much they save for retirement? And so again, that's just an example of what I love about how fields can come together. And it's an example of being in the right place at the right time. I don't think if I were maybe somewhere, I'm in Chicago, and the work that is happening here in those fields is so exciting. So it was a great time to be watching that and paying attention and thinking, this is a new direction we could take our work. And that maybe you can gather from the name of my research lab, the Behavioral Insights in Parenting Lab, which I co-founded with Susan Mayer at the Harris School about 8 years ago, takes its inspiration from those new directions, kind of bridging developmental psychology, family behavior and behavioral economics.
What are some of the most fun aspects of your job? And if you care to share, what are some of the least fun?
Okay. The most fun is the people. I mean, there is just no greater excitement than sitting in a room of smart people, students, other faculty, debating ideas and working out puzzles and trying to put our heads together to think about how we're going to solve this puzzle in front of us and how, what are just it's such a luxury to get to do that for a living, to be creative and to think of interesting projects to work on and then to do them. And I would say it's also very gratifying that I hope I'm working on questions that are relevant in the world and that can help make people's lives better. That feels very humbling to say that that's what I'm trying to do. But I feel extremely fortunate that I'm working on questions that are at the intersection of basic science and public policy. And my work has actually gotten much more applied in the past 10 years because I'm actually mostly out in the field collecting my own data these days, and I'm running field experiments to test different approaches to supporting parents. And in doing so, I'm talking to practitioners and people in the real world and asking them what's important to you, what's the biggest puzzle you want to solve, and how can I help you solve that? That I feel very grateful for that opportunity. So, I mean, it's a pretty wonderful life. It's intellectually fulfilling. And, I have to say, I think I've managed to fulfill my dreams of being a global citizen because the other great thing that academic life allows you to have is all these international collaborations. So I am a faculty member at the Norwegian School of Economics in Bergen, Norway. I have a faculty appointment at the Life Course Research Center in Brisbane at the University of Queensland in Australia, and have been able to have a whole set of interesting international projects and colleagues. So there's lots of opportunity for trying to still get at this question: how do people live their lives in other places in the world? And what can I learn from that? And how can that inspire the research that I do? So, in some ways, I think I have fulfilled those very early dreams. They've just taken a different form. What do I not like? Is that what you asked me?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's hard? Okay. I mean, it's like I can't honestly, I can't complain. I like almost everything about it. I love teaching. I love research. I love the people, my students and my faculty, research colleagues. Things don't always work out. Of course, there's lots of room for disappointment, and nobody likes that. I mean, you write far more papers than get accepted at the journals that you want to place them in. You write far more grant proposals than will ever get funded. So there can be pressure. I mean, I think the thing that I like most about it is also the thing that can be the most stressful. So the thing I like most about an academic career is the almost complete autonomy to do what you want as much as you want when you want. I mean, of course, within reason, but you're really it's all on you to. I mean, people work in teams, and I work in teams, and that's very common. But everything, your job is in your brain, and it's up to you to make it work with, of course, the right support. So that's great, but it can be stressful because the failures belong to you too. And the stress of keeping a big lab going is hard. I can say that for sure. You have a big group of people who work with me whose livelihoods I'm responsible for. So it's great to get a big research grant, but you have to start immediately thinking about the next one. As soon as you get one, you get to enjoy it for about 5 minutes. And then you have to be thinking about, okay, what's going to happen in 18 to 24 months when this one is over? So it's stressful, but I think the rewards, vastly outweigh those risks in my experience.
What would your advice be for people who are considering entering this field?
Well, for entering academia in general, again, I have laid out what I think has been a relatively more unusual path that I have taken. I haven't stuck super close to my own discipline. I mean, I haven't stayed, sort of deeply entrenched in the discipline in which I was trained because, as I've described, I've branched out and made a lot of collaborations with people in other fields. So I guess I would say two things. When you're a junior person, you can't really do that. you if you want to be successful in academia, you have to be a master of your own field first. So you should definitely do that and imagine that much of this work in collaborative work with others in other fields will probably come a little bit later. And then I would just say, always be curious. Always try to challenge yourself to think of what's a really important puzzle that I want to solve. I guess I would always say lead with the question, define yourself by the problems you want to solve and the questions you want to work on. And I think that's the way to stay interested and engaged in the work that you're doing.
I think you actually technically have already answered this, but this is the question we've been ending on, so I'll ask it as we come to the end anyway. What would you say is the most gratifying thing about your work?
I mean, the most gratifying thing, I guess, is that I never would have predicted that this is where I would have ended up at this moment. I mean, my career is probably at the halfway point. There's a lot of years ahead of me, and I wouldn't have. I love what I do, and I never would have imagined that I would have taken exactly this path. And I'm super inspired to be confident that I don't know exactly what the next years will look like. And to me, that is just, it's very fulfilling and it's very exciting to know that the handwriting is not on the wall, that I could go in many different directions. And what I most hope, I think, is that when I reach the end of my academic research career, that I am equally surprised at the place I find myself then.
Thank you, Professor Kalil, for your time today. Course takers, if you enjoyed listening to today's interview, please check out the other ones. You can also leave us a comment, subscribe, follow, and share this episode with your friends and family. You can find out more about the University of Chicago through uchicago.edu or the university's campus in Hong Kong through uchicago.hk. Stay tuned for more. We'll see you around.